All right. Hello, everyone. Can you hear me all right? It's okay. I'm Greg Burnett from the Political Science Department, and I'd like to welcome you all to today's event. This is our midterm election preview. As all of you know, or at least I hope you do, Election Day is just 1 week from today. It's Tuesday, November 6th, so you should put that in your calendars if it's not already in there. In just a few moments, you're going to hear from two experts who are currently also visiting faculty members here at Holy Cross, Peter Flaherty and Tim Bishop. They're going to guide us through the state of play 1 week out from Election Day. And they have their students here with us today from the Academic Internship Seminar that they're co-teaching. It's called Campaign 2018, a hands-on approach, and I know we'll be hearing from some of those students, hopefully many of those students, as we ask them questions and get into some discussion. So we're delighted to have all of those students here with us and many other people as well. Today's event is sponsored by the J.D. Power Center and the Charles Carroll Program, so we thank them for their support. And I also wanted to just announce that there'll also be, you'll have seen it on the posters, a post-midterm election wrap-up reaction event that's going to take place 1 week after Election Day, so Tuesday, November 13th. It will be right here, 2 p.m., so same time, same place. But jot that down. We'll have a similar cast. We'll also have two pollsters, nationally recognized pollsters, John McLaughlin and Jeffrey Pollack, so that'll be a great event, and I hope you'll all plan to attend that as well. I just want to briefly introduce today's presenters, for those of you who don't already know them. On the left, or your right, my left, Tim Bishop. Tim Bishop was elected to Congress in 2002, and he served 6 terms as the representative of the 1st District of New York. Before that, he had a long and distinguished career in higher education, including serving as provost at Southhampton College. During his time in Congress, he served on the Committee on Education and the Workforce and also on the Transportation Committee. In 2015, Congressman Bishop joined the faculty of St. Joseph's College as Distinguished Professor of Civic Engagement and Public Service. He's also currently a strategic advisor at Envision Strategy, a Washington, D.C. based government relations firm. Peter Flaherty was Deputy Chief of Staff and Senior Advisor to Massachusetts Governor Mitt Romney beginning in 2003. And he later became Deputy Campaign Manager and Senior Advisor for Mitt Romney when Romney was a candidate for the presidency. Before that, he was an Assistant District Attorney for Suffolk County and later the Vice President of Walden Media. Peter Flaherty is also the co-founder of the Shawmut Group, a public affairs and campaign consulting firm based in Boston. And in addition to his work on presidential campaigns, he's also worked on a number of Senate campaigns. So we're really delighted to have them here with us today and this semester. And I can't resist adding one final note, which is that although Professors Bishop and Flaherty belong to different political parties, they share an alma mater. Like me, they graduated from Holy Cross. So we're really glad to have them back here. They're proud graduates of this place. So with that, I'll turn it over to them. We'll end at 3:30, by the way. I think somebody had asked that. We'll end at 3:30. I know many of you are probably planning on attending the vigil on the Hovel, so we'll wind down at that time. We should have plenty of time to hear from them and get plenty of questions. So please join me in thanking them for being here today.
Thanks. I just wanted to start off by saying I was going to stand, but I might as well sit since I'm sitting. I'm so honored to be back at Holy Cross and to be able to participate in this way. To have a class now is fantastic. I have my own son goes to Holy Cross, and he used to be my favorite Holy Cross student until I had my own class, and so now he's my 21st favorite Holy Cross student. So it's been great. I've had an opportunity since I've been involved in the political world to speak at a lot of schools around the country. We at Holy Cross refer to them as safety schools like Harvard and Tufts and schools like that, but it was really the ultimate pleasure to be able to come back to Holy Cross, the times that I've been doing that over the last several years, and then now to get my own class. And to be with Tim Bishop. You'll hear from Tim as well. We're talking today mostly about the midterm elections, and that's what our class is focused on. And what you'll probably see is that this is probably going to be a tale of two different elections. One is the Senate, and one is the House. And we'll probably see a different result in both, meaning the Republicans will probably keep the Senate and maybe even gain seats, and I think the Republicans, and I'm going to have Tim speak to the House, but the Republicans will probably lose the House, and it's just a question of how much they're going to lose by. I come at it from the Republican strategist standpoint. Tim is actually a former member of Congress on the Democratic side, so although we come at it from two different philosophical and ideological lenses, we have had, and I think our class could probably confirm, a pretty good civilized debate on what has been happening in the campaigns around the country. Tim, you want to say anything just to start?
Just to echo what you said, Peter, about how great it's been for me to be able to come back to the campus and to interact with a group of really, really outstanding students. I very much like college campuses. I've spent most of my adult life on a college campus. And to be back at a place that I absolutely love, which is Holy Cross. And my older brother went here, my younger brother went here, so we're a Holy Cross family. Just has been a very enjoyable experience, but made more so by the students that we've had the opportunity to interact with and to meet. And I also have very much enjoyed working with Peter. He's right, we do come at not all issues, but many issues from different perspectives and different orientations. But I would like to think, at the risk of sounding self-important, I would like to think that the way in which we deal with the issues and how we differ on those issues could be behavior that the rest of the country would do well to try to emulate. In other words, that we can express our differences and do so in a way that's civil and constructive. And that's a quality that's very much lacking in our political discourse right now, I think much to our detriment. But with that, I will yield back to Peter. Peter's going to handle the Senate, and I will handle the House.
Sounds great. One other thing, just as a housekeeping matter that I wanted to talk about and really to emphasize is one thing you will realize as a Holy Cross graduate, if you haven't already realized it as a student, is that Holy Cross people watch out for Holy Cross people. Like no other school I've ever been involved in or ever spoken at or ever visited. Holy Cross students watch out for each other, and Holy Cross alums watch out for each other, and they watch out for Holy Cross students. I am no exception to that. When I speak at schools, I'll speak, I'll give whatever talk and take questions and answers. But when I speak at Holy Cross, I'll always give my personal email address and my cell phone number, because I will help anybody who goes to Holy Cross or who graduates from Holy Cross. So anyone who wants to get involved in either the law, getting involved in a prosecutor's office, getting involved in a political campaign, Republican, Democrat, or otherwise, and they want to talk to me about career choices, or they want to talk to me about maybe making a phone call for them, please make sure you get a hold of me or find my email or phone number from somebody else, because I will make sure that I help you out. And I know that probably, I don't want to speak for Tim, but I think that Tim feels the exact same way. So I just wanted to get that out there as well. So when we first started this course, what we talked about was the fact that the midterm elections are different than presidential election years for a whole lot of reasons. One, presidential election years, usually you'll see about 60% voter turnout, which is kind of sad that it's not 100%, but I mean, the reality is it's about 60, 62% on average. On midterm years or off-year elections, you're going to see about 40% turnout. So the question on midterms is who exactly is going to turn out. The other thing that we talked about is the fact that midterm elections, for the most part, are a referendum on the party in power, on the sitting president, one way or the other. And so what we've been looking at is midterm elections in recent history and how different events, current events, have impacted who turns out and what happens to the party in power to the House seats and to the Senate seats. And one of the things that we said at the very beginning was, we started the day after Labor Day. We said, this is a class where you're going to need to be engaged week to week, because we can't really even tell you what's going to happen on election day now, because there will be different events that will impact each of your races and each of the races around the country that we don't even know are going to happen. And sure enough, that has happened. One of them being the Brett Kavanaugh hearings, which is going to have an effect. We'll talk about that. What kind of an effect, which base it energized, and whether or not it's going to have an effect on people's races that we've assigned. For people who aren't in our class, what we did was we assigned a couple of congressional races and one U.S. Senate race to teams of 2 in our class for them to follow week to week and to kind of get involved and really get inside what they would do if they were actually running these campaigns, and to follow what different factors will actually affect each of these campaigns and each of the candidates that they were studying. So when I say each of your races, that's what I'm referring to. And the first book that we assigned was a book called The Thumpin', which was really detailed what happened in the 2006 midterm elections. So when I say midterm elections are a referendum on sitting president, just so you know, the president's party has lost, on average, 25 House seats since 1946. So basically, since they were counting this stuff. So when people say, oh, President Trump is going to lose all these seats, and it looks like President Trump has destroyed the country, and as a result, there's going to be a big blue wave, it's not President Trump. Presidents who are in power usually lose House seats. So that's one thing that everyone should remember. It's just a question of how many. And usually they'll say that, well, for instance, in 2006, that's how the name of the book, The Thumpin', happened. So they talked about how many seats were lost. Republicans lost 30 House seats and 6 Senate seats, and that was when George W. Bush was the President of the United States. And they asked him about it, and he said, look, this is a close election. If you look at race by race, it was close. The cumulative effect, however, was not too close. We took a thumping, and that's how that happened. Now, fast forward to 2010, when Barack Obama was the President of the United States. They called it a thumping in 2006 when George W. Bush lost 30 House seats. In 2010, President Obama and the Democrats lost 63 House seats, more than twice as many, and 6 Senate seats. And Obama, when asked, as George W. Bush was asked, he said, I'm very eager to sit down with members of both parties and figure out how we can move forward together. I'm not suggesting that this will be easy. I won't pretend that we'll be able to bridge every difference or solve every disagreement. And he also said that we took a shellacking. So it was a thumping in 2006 with Bush. 2010, there was a shellacking. Now the question is, what's going to happen in 2018 with President Trump? Now it's interesting because 2010, when they lost 63 House seats under Obama, they're starting to compare this to 2010, except in reverse, because the numbers are eerily similar. President Trump's and President Obama's disapproval in 2018 and 2010, respectively, were exactly the same at 49%. Their approval was at 47%. Bill Clinton's approval was actually at 48%, higher than both of them when he was in power in 1994. When Bill Clinton was in power in 1994 with an approval 1 point higher than Donald Trump's is today, he lost 54 House seats and 8 Senate seats. So I give you these numbers just so you can put it in perspective when you see all the analysis that happens and people say there was a blue wave and look what happened with President Trump and he's destroying the country, and you can see it because just look at the House races. You can see Wolf Blitzer right now going up to the board saying, oh, there's another House race lost, another House race lost, we're up to 20, 30, 40. So put it in perspective. 1, presidents in power usually lose seats, and 2, 54 seats were lost in 94, 63 seats were lost in 2010, 30 seats were lost in 2006 under George W. Bush when they called it a thumping. So it could be 2010 in reverse. The numbers seem to match up like that. Tim will talk about the House as to how many seats he thinks that it's going to be, probably somewhere between 25 and 40. And once again, it all depends on who exactly is going to turn out. Now, one of the things I talked about before, the way that you're going to turn out people and to determine how many people are going to turn out is you need to energize your base. Because of the fact that in midterms, like I said before, only 40% usually come to turn out. So who will be that 40%? And there are ways to try to determine who that's going to be, and there are ways to try to affect that if you are a party in power. I call them color enhancement events. Color enhancement meaning the red states and the red districts get redder, the blue states and the blue districts get bluer. Now, what are some of the color enhancement events that have happened since Labor Day, since we started this course? Judge Kavanaugh. One of the things that we do in our class is we start each class by saying, did President Trump have a good week or a bad week this week? And everyone usually laughs. And then we say, okay, let's talk about what happened between last week and this week, and we'll talk about different things that happened. And then we try to analyze it objectively and say, okay, is this event good or bad for Donald Trump's base? Is this going to bring Donald Trump voters out or not? Every week since we've been doing this, we've taken a poll of the class, and Donald Trump, as far as Donald Trump voters go, as far as energizing his base goes, has either had a good week or it's been a wash. Not once, according to all 20 in our class, including Tim and myself, has Donald Trump had a net bad week, according to the polling, informal as it is in our class. So that's one thing to keep in mind. Because a lot of times you'll see this in the news, and you'll get a certain perspective from CNN, MSNBC, mainstream media, such as it is, and you'll say, oh, poor, Donald Trump's going to get impeached tomorrow morning if he keeps it up. Yet, if you look at certain pockets around the country, it's actually the exact opposite, which brings me to the Senate. Now, you look at the Judge Kavanaugh hearings, which is one of those color enhancement events. Judge Kavanaugh hearings, the migrant caravan, that's a color enhancement event. The CNN and all of the George Soros, all of these mail bombs, that's another color enhancement event that might go in the other direction. And so those are things that will galvanize a base. The question is, how much does it energize a base? So let's just focus just on the Judge Kavanaugh hearings. When you saw the Judge Kavanaugh hearings happening, it looked as though Judge Kavanaugh was going to get confirmed, and it was not going to be really any more dramatic than when Justice Neil Gorsuch got confirmed. And then the allegations from Georgetown Prep, Dr. Christine Blasey Ford, and the other allegations that some of them were dismissed summarily, that Michael Avenatti came out. There were a few other ones that came out. So then the country became very quickly, number one, locked in. And number two, it seemed to become divided again. And the question became, is this going to now energize Donald Trump's base like the Democrats ultimately never wanted something like this to happen? So the question became, are the Democrats, like Kamala Harris, Cory Booker, all the people in the Senate Judiciary Committee, going to ask that one too many questions that's going to actually energize the base? Now, when you look at it, when all's said and done, when all of the hearings were over, when the questioning of Justice Kavanaugh, the questioning of Dr. Blasey Ford was all said and done, it all becomes a numbers game. And if you're in charge, if you're in control in the Senate, your person gets confirmed. That's ultimately what we found out. Right now, the state of play in the United States Senate is it's 51-49 in favor of Republicans. Now, as bad as people say that the country is, as bad as people say that the leadership is under President Trump and as divisive as he's making the country, when all is said and done, it seemed as though there were a couple of things that were in play to see whether or not Justice Kavanaugh was ultimately going to get confirmed. One, what was going to happen with Jeff Flake? If you followed that at all, Jeff Flake kind of pulled back and said, you know what, I want an FBI investigation. We need to see if we can be a little bit more exhaustive before we vote for this person to be on the highest court in the land until the day he dies. So people said, fair enough. Susan Collins was another swing vote. Lisa Murkowski was another swing vote. And so it seemed as though the popular thing to do was to either take a step back or maybe even vote no on Judge Kavanaugh. And the question became, how is this going to impact their races? And once again, it's a numbers game. If you're in control in the United States Senate, that's who confirms Supreme Court justices. So the irony is, after the Judge Kavanaugh hearings, when you're talking about a 51-49 Republican-Democrat control in the US Senate, all that they needed to do, the Democrats need to do in the 2018 midterms is flip 2 seats. And as it turns out, there are a few races, and I want to just talk about a few races for you guys to watch on election night. Election night can get really confusing, and when Tim starts talking, with all due respect, it might get more confusing because the House races, there's just more of them. But races that you can watch for to say, okay, what's happening on election night? What kind of bottom line do we have here? There are a few races that you can watch. One is Missouri, U.S. Senate race in Missouri. There's a Democrat incumbent. 2, the U.S. Senate race in Indiana. There's a Democrat incumbent. 3, U.S. Senate race in North Dakota. There's a Democrat incumbent. All 3 of them have one thing in common. They all voted against Justice Kavanaugh. You would think, okay, that's the right thing to do for Democrats, the politically popular thing to do. The problem with it is, in Missouri, Donald Trump won by 19 points. In Indiana, Donald Trump won by 19 points. And in North Dakota, Donald Trump won by 36 points. So those 3 Democratic incumbents are probably going to lose. So you're now talking about 51-49 turning into 54-46 in favor of the Republicans. There's another couple of seats that actually might turn Republican. Florida is one of them, and I'd like you to look at the Florida race. And then there's a couple of other races that are getting close as well. Another race to watch is West Virginia. West Virginia, there's another Democrat incumbent, and this is a very interesting race for one reason, and I want to just focus again on the Justice Kavanaugh hearings. There's a Democrat incumbent named Joe Manchin. Joe Manchin is in an interesting position. Joe Manchin voted in favor of Justice Kavanaugh. He got a lot of heat for doing it from the Democrats. Where he doesn't seem to be getting a lot of heat is from his constituents in West Virginia. Donald Trump won West Virginia by 42 points. The one thing that Joe Manchin did do was he waited to see how the votes were going to turn out. So it was interesting for anybody that followed it. Susan Collins was pretty much the vote that was going to determine it. When Susan Collins came out and said, I'm voting in favor of Justice Kavanaugh, then Joe Manchin came out and said, because at that point, the votes were what they were. He then came out of his office and said, I'm voting in favor of Justice Kavanaugh too. And when Mike Pence went to go campaign against Joe Manchin, he said something funny. He said, that's typical Joe Manchin, always there when you don't need him. So I think, ironically enough, the only way that the Democrats are going to be able to stop confirmation hearings and stop Supreme Court justices appointed by Donald Trump is to regain control of the Senate. And by what happened during the Justice Kavanaugh confirmation hearings, it looks as though instead of regaining control of the Senate, they're going to actually lose 3, if not 4 seats. So I think that might be a story for everyone to watch in the midterms. It's interesting because the Republicans are only defending 9 seats in the United States Senate. They have 51 seats, only 9 of them being defended. They have another advantage because of those 9 seats, Trump won in every state except one, which is Nevada. Hillary Clinton won by a couple of points. And the incumbent senator is actually up in that race. The Democrats are defending 26 U.S. Senate seats, and Trump won 10 of those, a lot of them by over 15 points. So the Democrats in the Senate, like I said, there's going to be a tale of 2 elections. The Senate is going to be a lot different than the House. Not only will the Republicans do well and retain control, they're going to increase, and Tim, I'd be interested to see what you think of this. I think they're going to increase by 3, maybe 4 seats. So those are the seats to watch. A couple of seats that might be kind of interesting, that may kind of throw this upside down, is Arizona, which is an open seat. Jeff Flake is retiring. A woman named Martha McSally and Kirsten Sinema, they're kind of neck and neck, but it's a Republican state. Trump won Arizona by 4 points, so I think Arizona will stay Republican, but that's worth watching. And another one that's kind of exciting to watch is Ted Cruz in Texas. Ted Cruz is up, but he's only up by about 4 or 5 points in Texas, which is kind of dangerous ground. If you're following that race at all, there's kind of a little bit of a cult candidacy going on down there with Beto O'Rourke. He's raised like $5 trillion a day for the last few weeks. but it doesn't seem to be translating at the ballot box. It doesn't seem to be translating too much in polling, but we'll see. Because 4 or 5 points for a Republican incumbent U.S. Senator is a little bit dangerous territory, at least in my mind. Another one that's interesting is New Jersey. New Jersey is typically a reliably blue state, almost as reliable as Massachusetts. There's this U.S. Senator who's a sitting U.S. Senator named Bob Menendez. He was up by a ton of points. Hillary Clinton won by 14 to 15 points in New Jersey. All of a sudden, that race is tightening. He's under an ethics investigation. There's an active legal investigation into him. And I think the people of New Jersey, they've elected Republicans before. Chris Christie was the governor there recently. They may, in fact, try to send him a message. That's become a very, very tight race. It's gone from a likely Democratic retention seat to just a lean Democrat seat. I've seen polling that has it as close to 3 or 4 points. So New Jersey is one to watch. If New Jersey ever goes Republican, the Republicans in the United States Senate could go up to 55, 56, 57. So those are kind of the interesting races to watch. And just a few different groups that I want you to take a look at is in the suburbs, white women, Latinos, and millennials. And let me just go into that really quickly. In the suburbs, in 2010, that election that I was telling you about when the Democrats lost 63 House seats when President Obama was in power, the Republicans led in the suburbs by 13 points back then. And now in 2018, they've lost that entire lead. In fact, Democrats have a 1-point lead with suburban voters. That, Tim will talk about, is very important because in the battleground House congressional seats, suburban voters are huge. White women, once again, in the House battleground seats in those districts, the white woman vote is huge. In 2010, Republicans led white women, believe it or not, by 19 points. In 2018, the Democrats have erased that lead, and now the Democrats lead white women by 8 points. That's a 27-point turnaround. So those are 2 demographics that are going to be interesting to watch. Another one, and this is where it could really become the blue wave that people are talking about, is Latinos and millennials. In 2010, after Barack Obama was elected, Latinos and millennials were a huge part of the Obama coalition numbers-wise, a huge part. But what happens, and this is one of the reasons why presidents in power don't do as well, there's such an enormous national effort to get the president elected, whether it's Barack Obama or Donald Trump. And there's a certain kind of entrenched success and that people feel it's not laziness, but people are exhausted. Anyone that's involved, especially the students that are involved in internships, it's knocking doors, it's the real grunt work. People are wiped out. And they just don't get involved in the midterms. That's why it goes from 60% to 40%, and sometimes even lower. And that's what happened in the 2010 midterms. The coalition of Latinos and millennials that helped elect Obama, they weren't energized. In 2010, as far as an enthusiasm gap goes, they measure enthusiasm by what is your level of interest in the election. They go just a scale of 1 to 10. And 9s and 10s were 48% of Latinos said they were 9s and 10s in 2010. In 2018, they've asked Latinos, 9s and 10s, how many 9s and 10s? 71% of Latinos say their level of interest is a 9 or a 10. So the Obama coalition of Latinos is back. They're energized. Watch that for the midterms. And it's interesting, and the reason why I say, the only reason why, this is pure data. I'm not broad brushing anything here, guys. Okay? The only reason why I'm saying that could favor Democrats is Latinos favor Democratic control of Congress when asked, polled recently in the last couple of weeks. They favor Democratic control by 26 points. So Latinos who favor Democratic control versus Republican control, Democratic control wins by 26 points. That's why that's an interesting demographic. The other one is millennials. Millennials were huge in the Obama election nationwide. Even the ones who didn't vote were at the party. It was a big deal. But in 2010, that coalition just they were kind of waiting for the next re-elect. Some of them probably didn't even know there was an election going on, with all due respect to millennials. So in 2010, people who were millennials, or people who are age 18 to 34, they said, can you say you're a 1 through a 10? 9s and 10s, 34% said they were a 9 or a 10. In 2018, ages 18 to 34, 51% now say they're at a 9 or a 10. The reason why that's important for Democrats is because ages 18 to 34, when asked, do you favor Democratic control or Republican control of Congress? 18 to 34 say Democrat control wins by 40 points. So if they can get Latinos and millennials at 9s and 10s at that level, there could be the blue wave that they talk about. The one last thing that I wanted to talk about before we, what time do we have here? Oh, good, almost exactly. Is the enthusiasm gap, and this is a trend line towards Republicans, and this is why this is not very predictable. And I'll get back to that in 1 second. As far as 9s and 10s go, from January through September of this year, there was constant polling being done on this enthusiasm gap, just because of the fact that for midterms, that really is the way to gauge what's going to happen in an election, is are you going to be able to get your vote energized, are you going to get your base energized and get your vote out? From January through September, Democrats versus Republicans, 9s and 10s, 63-53 Democrats. So 63% of Democrats say they're a 9 or a 10, 53% of Republicans say they're a 9 or a 10. Now in October, it's Democrats are still leading, but it's not 63-53, it's 72-69. So, and they attribute that almost entirely to the Cavanaugh hearings and the migrant caravans. Now, the Cavanaugh hearings and the migrant caravans are two what I call color enhancement events. Now, which would be, if you look at it and do the analysis, are color enhancement events that are making red states redder, and not necessarily blue states or blue districts as blue as the reds are getting red, if you can follow me there. Now, another couple of color enhancement events have happened since then, which have actually, over the last 48 hours, have actually slowed that Republican trend. One's a tragedy, and the other one is, we already talked about it, was the mail bombs. The fact that the mail bombs happened is one thing. The fact that the mail bombs happened and they found the guy and they have footage of him at a Trump rally with a Trump sign, and he's living in a van with Make America Great Again stickers and Donald Trump stickers all over it, is not good for Republican trend lines. Let's be serious. And then the Pittsburgh shooting, even though the guy who did it said, I can't stand Donald Trump, the fact that it seems to be rage-driven and divisive, those are things that are associated fairly or unfairly with the presidency and the rhetoric of the current administration. So those are two events that have happened that maybe have reversed the trends of the Cavanaugh migrant caravan thing. Now, Donald Trump knows that immigration is a color enhancement policy area, and it is something that he's going to need for his base. So what he did this morning was they leaked out his interview with Axios, which says he wants to end birthright citizenship. And that is going to get the debate going again about birthright citizenship and whether babies born to illegal immigrants can become automatic U.S. citizens. Donald Trump doesn't think that they should be. And so he is going to try to get the focus and the debate, which it already has. He switched everything from the mail bombing and even the Pittsburgh shooting. Now everyone in the last 6 or 7 hours has been talking about birthright citizenship. And that's exactly what Donald Trump wants for the Republican base to be talking about right now, is immigration. So how much of an effect this is going to have, nobody really knows. The conventional wisdom is we're going to pick up seats in the House if you're a Democrat, pick up seats in the Senate if you're a Republican. People have counted Donald Trump out before, so that's all I'll say. In 2016, no one ever thought Donald Trump was going to become the president of the United States, maybe even including Donald Trump. So I don't think that you can really predict what is going to happen. I think, like I said, the conventional wisdom is what it is as far as the House and the Senate. what I would say to you is this, what we'll always say after 2016. Listen to people, don't listen to pollsters, and listen to your neighbors, don't listen to newscasters. Because people have a good gut, and a lot of people, especially in the day and age of Donald Trump, if we're in a room like this, in a room of more than 10 people, and I say, raise your hand if you like Donald Trump. Raise your hand if you voted for Donald Trump. Everyone will look around like this. And then if you walk out there and you have private conversations, people say, I don't like the guy. I can't stand the guy. He's the worst guy in the world. I hate what he says about women. I hate what he says about this. But you know what? He keeps his promises. I like the fact that he keeps taxes low. I like what he's doing in North Korea. And then they say they voted for him. And it shocks you. So you have no idea what's going to happen. Having said that, Tim's going to tell us a little bit about the House, and I'm going to open up to questions.
Thank you very much, Peter. And I want to just sort of set the stage in some ways the same way that Peter did. And for those of you in the class, some of you will be hearing this information for at least the second, if not the third time. As Peter said, midterm elections, particularly in the House, are about two things. They're about a referendum on the president. They're about turnout. Midterm elections historically struggle with turnout, and one of the questions that will be answered a week from today is whether the passion that has inflamed our country on both sides of the aisle will result in increased turnout. One measure of that is turnout for contested primaries. And for the 2018 cycle, Democratic turnout in contested primaries was up by 87%. Republican turnout was up by 23%. So by that measure, that speaks to the extent to which partisans in each party are anxious to vote and are anxious to send whatever message their vote says, whether it's a repudiation of the president or whether it is a ratification of the president, remains to be seen. Another measure of interest, which would translate into turnout, is money. And both sides have raised more grassroots money this year than in past years in midterm elections. But by far and away, the Democratic performance in terms of raising grassroots money outstrips the Republican performance in raising grassroots money. Now, when we first entered into this cycle, everyone knew it was going to be a tough cycle for the Republican Party because of the historical trends which Peter outlined in terms of what happens in midterm elections. I'll sharpen one point. Average loss in midterm elections, as Peter said, since World War II has been 27 for the party out of power. But when the party in power, when the president of that party has an approval rating under 50, the average loss is 41 seats. And we all know that President Trump's approval rating right now is under 50. In fact, it's at its highest point it has been during his presidency, but still under 50. So we knew that it was going to be a tough year for Republicans. Whether it was going to be sufficiently tough for them to lose the majority and the Dems to take on the majority is an unknown, which I'll talk about in a second. But the Republicans had two built-in firewalls. One was the cumulative effect of redistricting that took place in 2011. In 2009 and in 2010, Democrats at the state level lost over 1,000 seats. They took the wrong years to do it because 2010 was a census year and 2011 was a redistricting and reapportionment year. That meant that in, I think, 36 of our 50 states, the district lines were drawn by Republican legislatures and approved by Republican governors. And this is, by the way, a bipartisan problem. When Dems are in charge, they draw districts to favor Dems, and when Republicans are in charge, they draw districts to favor Republicans. So there is a built-in advantage, a structural advantage to House races because there are more districts in the country drawn to favor Republicans than there are Democrats. The other advantage that everyone presumed that Republicans would have would be money. And that has not eventuated. Republicans still have the big donors, the Sheldon Adelsons, the Koch brothers, and so on. But their grassroots fundraising has been dwarfed by Democratic fundraising, grassroots fundraising. And one thing to think about when you look at the total amount of money that is available to parties and candidates is, where does it come from? Sheldon Adelson can write out a $25 million check, but he can only cast one vote. When Beto O'Rourke raises $36 million in 3 months, which is just off the chart, folks, $12 million a month, $3 million a week, that's incredibly difficult. But he raised it in grassroots fundraising, much of it from the state of Texas. So everybody that gave him $50 or $100, that's a vote. So yes, you have Sheldon Adelson, and on the Dem side you have Steyer and Bloomberg. They only cast one vote each of them. But when you raise money on the grassroots level, that translates into votes, because the best way to express one's enthusiasm for a candidate or a party is to actually give that candidate or a party money, in addition to working for that candidate or a party, or to going out and voting for them. One more just metric is what's called the generic ballot. And that measure has historically, throughout this cycle, favored Democrats. That is still the case. It's bounced around a lot. For the better part of 2018, pre the summer, the Dems had a double-digit lead in the generic ballot. Then that narrowed to about 7 points. It's now back up, still bouncing around, but it's now back up to around 9 or 10 points. For frame of reference, when, in President Obama's words, when the Republicans gave the Democrats a shellacking in 2010, the generic ballot lead for Republicans that year was 6. Right now, the Democrats are at 9. Does that eventuate into another shellacking? We don't know. Won't know until late Tuesday night or early Wednesday morning. But it is another metric that suggests that the Dems should have a successful night. So that we all have the same numbers. There's 435 members of the House. Right now it's 240 Republicans, 195 Dems. So in order to be the majority party, the Democrats need to pick up a net of 23 seats, or put differently, in order to retain the majority, the Republican Party can afford to lose 22 seats net. There are about 70 to 75 races that are in play. That, by the way, is a lot of races. There have been elections where the number of races, off year and presidential year elections, where the number of races that are in play are in the 20s and 30s. And there have been elections where to be an incumbent is practically a guarantee of being reelected. That is changing. It started to change dramatically in '94, and then has changed at varying degrees of intensity since then. But right now, being an incumbent is still better than being a challenger, but being an incumbent is no guarantee of success. So there's about 70 or 75 races, so that it's best understood if I put them into 7 categories. The first category are currently held Democratic seats that are not yet considered a lock for the Democratic candidate to be reelected. There are 6 of them. None of them are seats in which the current incumbent is running for reelection. They are all seats in which the incumbent has either chosen to retire or is running for another office. But there are a total of 6, of which 1 is thought to be leaning significantly towards Republican, and that's Minnesota 8. It's a seat that's being vacated by a man named Rick Nolan, who served in Congress for a long, long time in 2 different tranches, and he's retiring. It's a seat that he only won by 2,000 votes in 2016, and that seat was originally considered a toss-up, but it is now trending away from the Democrats, and the Republican candidate is viewed as as pretty sure to win, to the extent that the Democrats have now pulled out of the race. In other words, the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee and the Democratic super PACs are no longer supporting the Democratic candidate in that race. So there are 6 races. Dems are pretty heavily favored to win 5 of them, but will likely lose 1. I should point out, implicit in what I'm saying is that there is no Democratic incumbent running for re-election that is considered to be vulnerable. So every current member of Congress, Democrat running for re-election, is expected to retain his or her seat. The second category are what I'm referring to as near certain Democratic pickups. These are races where the Democrat is consistently ahead by comfortable margins in both public and private polling, and that in all cases for these races, there are 7 of them, the Republicans have given up. They have pulled out their money. So those are 7 races that are likely to be in the Democratic column when we all wake up on the morning of November 7th. Interestingly, 5 of them are in Pennsylvania. Pardon me, 4 of them are in Pennsylvania. I spoke before about one of the firewalls that the Republicans were counting on was that districts were drawn to favor them in so many of our states. Pennsylvania was one of those states. But the Pennsylvania Democratic Party brought a case against the redistricting in Pennsylvania, declaring or asserting that it was an unconstitutional gerrymander. The Pennsylvania Supreme Court found for the Democratic Party in Pennsylvania and then directed the Pennsylvania state legislature to redraw the districts so that they did not reflect what was being referred to as an unconstitutional gerrymander. The Pennsylvania legislature refused to do that. So the Pennsylvania Supreme Court drew the district, and it has resulted in a map that now is more fairly drawn. Pennsylvania has about 2.5 million more Democrats than Republicans. Yet of their 16 members of the House under current structure, 5 of them are held by Democrats and 11 are held by Republicans. That's now expected to move to the point where the 16 seats may be evenly divided, 8 and 8, may even be 9 and 7, with the Democrats having the 9. So there are, as I say, there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There are 7 seats in play. There are 7 seats that are in this category that I'm calling near certain Democratic pickups. 4 of them are in Pennsylvania, 2 in New Jersey, 1 in California. Then the third category that I've sort of defined here are seats that are very strongly leaning to the Democrat. The Democrat is consistently ahead by margins that are outside of the margin for error, again, both in public and in private polling. And in some cases, the Republicans have pulled out and are telling the candidate that they're on their own. By the way, the party structure pulling out is not necessarily fatal. Each race is idiosyncratic. Each race in many ways rises and falls on the strength or lack thereof of the candidate. And also important to note is a candidate does not have to outspend his or her opponent in order to win. I ran 7 races, 6 of them ended well, 1 of them not so well, but I was outspent in 5 of the 7 races that I ran. So you don't have to outspend your opponent. It helps, but you don't have to outspend your opponent. And there are 8 races in this category, including another race in Minnesota. Minnesota, I'll come to that in a minute, is a state that bears watching. But there are some of the races. Peter made reference to losing women, Republican Party having women fall away from the party, and particularly suburban women. And some of these districts that are in this category Virginia 10, which is the suburb of Washington, D.C. Minnesota 2, suburb of Minneapolis. Minnesota 3, another suburb of Minneapolis. Kansas 3, a suburb of Kansas City. Illinois 6, a suburb of Chicago. These are all seats that have, for the most part, been Republican over the recent past, but are comprised of the kinds of population, if you will, or demographics that has turned against President Trump. Women, the women's vote, highly affluent, highly educated. Those are the constituencies where President Trump is struggling, and these are the constituencies that characterize the districts that I'm citing. So there are 15 seats that are either certain Democratic pickups or near certain Democratic pickups. So if all of that eventuates, or even if 12 of the 15 eventuates, that puts the Democrats about halfway to the 23 they need. Then there are, the fourth category, there are another 15 seats that are lean Democratic. The definition of that I'm using anyway is that the Democratic candidate is ahead in most polling, but his or her lead is within the margin for error. And in all cases, the Republican incumbent is under 50%, a point I will return to in a minute. But there are 15 seats that fall into that category, including some that are the same kinds of suburban seats that we've talked about, and the same kinds of coastal seats. As I'm sure you know, the Democratic Party has pretty much become a coastal party, West Coast, East Coast, some in the industrial Midwest, although that didn't exactly work out for Secretary Clinton in 2016. 4 of the seats in this category of 15 are in California. So California is another state that bears watching. Then the 5th category are true toss-ups, where it really is a pick-em race, where neither candidate is above 50. In some cases, the Republican candidates are ahead or slightly behind. In other cases, the Democratic candidate is ahead or slightly behind. So really, really difficult to see. There are 11 seats in that category, including another one in Pennsylvania, a few more in New Jersey, and so on. There's one in Texas that bears watching, actually 2 in Texas that bears watching for 2 reasons. One is if Beto O'Rourke is able to translate the grassroots ardor that is behind his incredible fundraising. If he's able to translate that into turnout and votes, that will have a down ballot impact on these House races. So that's reason number 1. Reason number 2 is both of these seats. Texas 32 is a guy named Pete Sessions, who's been in Congress at least 20 years, and Texas 7 is a guy named John Culberson, also in Congress 18 or 20 years. Neither one of them has had a tough race in a long, long time. And one of the things that happens to members of the House, in the same way that an athlete who doesn't continue to work out gets out of shape, candidates and incumbents get out of shape. They don't have a campaign infrastructure. They're unfamiliar with what consultants they should bring in. They're not, if you will, battle ready or battle tested. And in every wave of midterm election that we've had, in '94 when the Dems got clobbered, in 2006 when the R's lost 30 seats, in 2010 when the Dems got clobbered, and then some, even worse than '94. There were a handful of seats each cycle that were on no one's radar screen. No one thought that the incumbent was in the slightest bit of trouble, and all of a sudden that incumbent loses by a point or 2 points. And it happens because the incumbent has been lulled to sleep by 8, 10, 12 years of no tough races, and all of a sudden they're in a tough race and they're not ready. The 6th category are seats that are leaning Republican, and this category is the Republican is consistently ahead, but inside the margin for error in most cases, and in most cases the candidate is under, both candidates, both the Republican who's ahead and the Democrat who's challenging, are under 50. This category includes one member of Congress running in California 50, who's running under federal indictment. Never a good thing, by the way. We've polled it, it's not a good thing. And another seat, the one that I'm particularly watching because it will sort of prove the point I'm trying to make that I talked about, Texas 7 and Texas 32. Georgia 7, occupied by a man named Rob Woodhull, came in on the Tea Party wave of 2010. I don't even think has had an opponent since then. So he's now all of a sudden having to do something that he hasn't had to do for a while. We'll see what happens. But as I say, there are 15 seats in that category. And then the last category are likely Republicans, where the Republican is ahead, in some cases above 50, and in some cases outside the margin for error, but the race is not yet locked up, and there are 11 seats in that category. So that should total 73 seats. Some states to watch. Pennsylvania has 7 seats that are in play. California has 7 seats that are in play. Minnesota 5, New Jersey 4, and New York 5. So we may not know who the majority or which party will be the majority party in the House until 2, 3 in the morning, New York time or East Coast time on Tuesday night into Wednesday morning, because how these California seats go may well determine which party is in the majority. We'll know about Pennsylvania, we'll know about New Jersey, we'll know about New York, but we may not know about the others. Florida's got a handful of seats, I think 3 or 4 seats, including one, a sleeper seat outside of the Orlando area, occupied right now by a guy named Dennis Ross, who's retiring. Solid Republican seat, but all of a sudden the polling suggests that the Republican challenger or the Republican candidate is in trouble. One of the things that I find striking, and it is emblematic of how tightly contested these races are and how fraught with difficulty predicting the outcome is there are 50 Republican candidates, at least 50, who are under 50%. I mean, they have not had a poll yet that puts them north of 50, and we're 6 days out from the election. I will tell you from experience, that is a decidedly uncomfortable place to be. Historically, what happens, and it stands to reason, is the undecideds gravitate to the challenger in much bigger numbers than to the incumbent. And it stands to reason. Incumbent's been in office at least 2 years, perhaps 4, 6, 8, 10. People have had an opportunity to observe him or her, have had an opportunity to form judgments about that incumbent, and if they're still not sold 6 days out that that incumbent deserves to be rehired, chances are the challenger's going to get most of the undecideds. So all of this bears watching, but the real key, again, under 50, the real key is going to be turnout. And so will all this enthusiasm on the Democratic side, and will this now newfound enthusiasm, as Peter pointed out, on the Republican side subsequent to the Cavanaugh hearings, will that translate into votes? I think it will, but we won't know, obviously, until Tuesday night. Both parties, by the way, have made their closing arguments. Closing argument on the Dem side is healthcare, and the irony of this, the elections of 2010, 12, 14, and 16, healthcare was used as a club against the Democrats. Democrats were bludgeoned for their support of the Affordable Care Act, and in many cases, Democrats couldn't survive that attack. Now, when people are recognizing that the Affordable Care Act could possibly go away, and recognizing that there has been, in effect, false promises that we're going to give you a much better plan, and all of a sudden they now have all 3 levers of power and can't deliver on that plan, people are saying maybe we better stick with what we have. So healthcare is now a potent weapon on behalf of Democrats, whereas for the 4 cycles previous to that, it was a very potent weapon on the part of Republicans. I think Republicans have made their closing argument, and you will forgive me if I have a bias. But I think their closing argument is fear. Fear of the caravan. Fear of undocumented immigrants. fear of ISIS, this is the playbook that worked for them spectacularly well in 2014. In 2014, it was ISIS, it was Ebola, and it was immigration. 2016, perhaps the most potent policy position that the president had, now President Trump had, was the wall that reverberates through virtually everyone's assessment of why they supported President Trump. They supported him for lots of reasons, but the wall is pretty much a constant. And so that's why we're deploying 5,200 troops to the border. That's why we're talking about birthright citizenship 6 days out from the election or 7 days out from the election. So that's where I think this is going, and whether that argument resonates or whether the healthcare argument resonates remains to be seen. One thing that's very interesting, and I think a huge mistake, and Peter, I'd love to know your take on this, is why the Republicans aren't talking about it. If you look at every economic indicator, with the exception of the stock market, which only recently began to fade, every other economic indicator is positive. Wages are up, job availability is up, unemployment is down. People are, the jobs are more plentiful, people are feeling more comfortable, foreclosures are down. So normally, when the party in power has an economic argument to make, they make it. That's not happening. Passed a $1.5 trillion tax cut, and they're not talking about it. What they are talking about is a phantom, an additional 10% tax cut for middle class, which suggests that they are recognizing that their tax cut either hasn't been sold properly or is not being well received. But I've been surprised that they have not used the economy as an argument that says, hey, you may not like what I say, you may not like how I say it, but I'm delivering for you, and you should feel comfortable in both the big economy and the so-called real economy. They're not doing that. So
I'll tell you why.
Okay.
Because you need to energize the base in the midterms. Like I said, if you elect Donald Trump and Donald Trump is your guy and things seem to be going along swimmingly and the economy's going well and jobs are going well and the tax cuts seem to be working, then there's nothing that's really going to get you off your couch other than, you know, things seem to be going fine and we'll make sure that we get Donald Trump back in 2020. And also, the way that the tax cuts were sold and the economic message and the success of the economy didn't work that well in primaries or special elections as well as they thought, quite frankly, as far as polling goes. Special elections and primaries are little petri dishes as far as, okay, let's see what kind of messages work. Let's see what's going to get people really going and get people motivated. The economy is working and the tax cuts are great, just didn't do it. So as far as getting the base energized, it's not what's working, it's what's not working. So you're going to see in the House races all around the country, there may be some ads against Donald Trump from the Democrats. There are more ads against Nancy Pelosi from Republicans than there are against Donald Trump for Democrats. The other thing that the Democrats are not running on, which is interesting, is impeachment. There are not House members running around, or House candidates on the Democratic side saying, vote for me because I'm going to impeach Donald Trump. Now, that doesn't mean that they're not going to impeach Donald Trump. In fact, I think if and when the Democrats get control of the House, I think they're going to impeach Donald Trump. I think it would be the worst thing that the Democrats could do for the Democrats. Because it will just, you want to talk about energizing a base, that will almost ensure Donald Trump's reelection for 2020. So for those of you who are Democrats who don't want Donald Trump reelected, you should call your congressman and say, don't impeach Donald Trump.
I'll make a prediction. My prediction, first off, I think the Dems will pick up somewhere between 25 and 35 seats. So if, to the extent that it's closer to 25, that means the majority will be a very narrow majority. But my prediction is that if Nancy Pelosi is reelected Speaker, which is a huge if, but if she is reelected Speaker, the Dems will not impeach because Nancy Pelosi will be able to control, and this is one of the reasons people criticize her is because of the extent to which she's able to control the Democratic caucus. But there's a plus to that as well. And I think she recognizes the political peril of moving to impeachment. I do think the Dems will make President Trump's life miserable in terms of investigations in the same way that the Republican Congress made President Obama's life miserable with investigations, and the Republican Congress made President Clinton's life miserable with investigations. I do think that will happen. There will be subpoenas, and I do think we will also have a constitutional crisis that will be determined by the new Supreme Court, because I'm willing to bet that if the House Government Reform Committee, for example, subpoenas Trump's records on fill in the blank, name whichever issue you want to focus on, he will refuse to comply, and that will then get adjudicated by the Supreme Court. So.
And it's all going to be decided by Justice Kavanaugh.
Yep.
Now, the other thing is this: Nancy Pelosi's smart because she's been around. She's clearly been around a long time. Because she knows what impeachment does and what kind of effect it does and what kind of effect it has on the base. So for instance, when Bill Clinton lost, let's see, in 1994, he lost 54 seats in the House, and he lost 8 Senate seats, and then he was impeached. Then he won 5 House seats, and he lost 0 Senate seats. So that has a way of galvanizing a party and galvanizing a base, the likes of which we haven't seen since Bill Clinton. Nancy Pelosi knows that. That's and the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee, they know it too. All of these campaigns, and the students in our class know this, they all are talking with the national campaign committees on what the formula is, what to run on, what not to run on. There's a national message, there's a national theme. Run on this, run on that, don't run on this, don't run on that, don't use the I word for impeachment. The other thing is President Trump, love him or hate him, he gives you a good 2 or 3 quotes every single week, which is one of the things that we talk about in our class. We usually, if we have enough time, we'll have hands raised and say, what was your favorite Donald Trump quote of the week? President Obama said, he kind of took his medicine, said, we got to shellac it. George W. Bush said, we got to thump it. So there's no real blame that goes around. My guess is if the House is lost to the Democrats, my guess is that President Trump will probably not take the blame himself. And he's
wow, you are out on the limb on that.
and he's kind of given us a little bit of an indication from some of the rallies that he's going to. When people say that if the House is lost, then Trump could get impeached. And when they asked Trump what he thinks of that, he said, well, if I do get impeached, it's all of your fault, because that means you didn't go out to vote. So don't blame me, you should blame yourselves. And that's kind of his motivating message. And then when they asked Donald Trump, well, what would happen if you did get impeached? He was asked by somebody in a sit-down interview. And he said, this is his exact quote. First of all, he said, there's no way that I could get impeached, because how can they impeach someone that's doing a great job? And I'm doing a great job. That was his quote. And then they said, well, let's play this out. What would happen if you did get impeached? He said, I'll tell you exactly what would happen. If I ever get impeached, this is his exact quote. If I ever get impeached, I think the stock market would crash and everybody would be very poor. So that's, I don't think that you'll hear the word impeachment over the next week or so on the Democrat side. I do think, and that's a great point by Congressman Bishop, if Nancy Pelosi is not elected Speaker, assuming that the Democrats gain control of the House, and there's a new Speaker, I do think the House will impeach Donald Trump, and it will make Donald Trump the strongest re-election candidate in a long time. So those are things to watch for as well. And let's also not forget another thing that a lot of these House candidates are running on, and it'll be funny to see what they do if in fact they gain control of the House and if in fact they win their races. There's a long list, Tim would probably know most of them by name, who have said they are not going to vote for Nancy Pelosi for Speaker. And quite frankly, not to be cynical, it's because they polled it in their district.
Yeah. I will say 2 things to that. One, the reticence to vote for Nancy Pelosi is understandable. As Peter suggested, she does not poll well. The Republicans have done a phenomenal job of demonizing her since 2006 or 2007. But she's got 2 things going for her. One, there is no likely heir.
Or heiress.
Or heiress, thank you. So it's hard to get beat by somebody that doesn't exist. So, and right now, her successor does not exist. And the other is these people who are saying that they're going to vote against Nancy Pelosi haven't encountered Nancy Pelosi's persuasive power yet. She gets them in a room, and they're going to have an awful hard time looking her in the eye and saying, "I'm sorry, Nancy, but I just can't do it." So we got about 20 minutes left, so let's go to questions. Who's got questions? Cora?
What do you think the candidates who've received such large sums of money in the past few weeks, how should they use that money to kind of increase the voter enthusiasm in their own districts and states?
I'll take a crack at it, but you're the political strategist.
I'm the strategist, you're the candidate. You can say what you want, then I'll tell you what to do with the money.
Typical campaign consultant, you know? Candidate doesn't matter. I think I don't, not to hedge, but it depends on the district. But I know one thing, if I were the candidate, I would want to make damn sure that I had not left a single thing on the table in terms of turnout. I would want to make sure that my field campaign, particularly if I'm in a contested race, I would want to make damn sure that my field operation was second to none. And so that if there was a Democratic vote out there, my people were going to find that Democratic vote and carry them to the polls if they had to.
That's a candidate's answer. The strategist, it all depends. A lot of the strategist's answer, as the congressman would tell you, would be to do TV ads, all sorts of TV ads. And a lot of the reasons why is because sometimes the strategists get a percentage of the ad buy. So that's what
it's true. Last weekend of my last campaign, I was somehow convinced to spend $500,000 on network advertising. By the way, $500,000 on network advertising when you're talking about New York City rates buys you about 5 seconds. But I might as well have taken that money and thrown it in the ocean. It didn't do an ounce of good for me.
Yeah.
So both of you touched on the suburban vote and like specifically suburban women. I'm actually from Virginia 10, so like I know like Comstock and everything. But I was wondering how you think, I know before like in the summer and everything leading up to like essentially Cavanaugh, like they thought that was going to fuel kind of because they're traditionally Republican, but that they're so anti-Trump now. But do you think in the wake of the Cavanaugh hearings and confirmation that like I know a lot of suburban moms specifically like kind of sympathize with the Cavanaugh family and specifically Justice Cavanaugh, do you think that their their I don't know, disgust with Trump will like outweigh the fact that they're kind of energized by the fact that they feel that this was kind of a, I don't know, like a smear campaign against Cavanaugh, or do you think that it will be the fuel for the blue, quote unquote, blue wave?
Well, I'll give it a shot, and then Tim will get it right. What I think is this: I think if the Cavanaugh hearing and the Cavanaugh testimony and the Dr. Blasey Ford testimony that day, which was no matter which way you looked at it, was really a riveting time in recent political memory, and will be forever in political history, like the Anita Hill, Clarence Thomas hearing. If that were taken by itself in a vacuum, I would say, Anna, that you could analyze that in a way that suburban women might say, you know what, the Democrats kind of, they kind of bit off a little bit more than they could chew, and you know, kind of enough is enough, and they overplayed their hand. But I think when you look at the larger picture when it comes to suburban women and where they think President Trump is on all of his policies, dating right back to, and I was involved in the Republican presidential primary. You know, one of the guys on the stage was Governor Bush, who I worked with, you know, right back to when he said that, you know, Carly Fiorina was ugly, and then, you know, with the Billy Bush tapes and all of that stuff. I think even suburban women who voted for him, I don't think that the Kavanaugh hearings would be enough to tip it back and say, you know, enough is enough. But I will say, this is one person's opinion, that I think the Democrats may have, to a certain degree, snatched a defeat from the jaws of victory when it came to that particular, just to put it in political terms as far as who's going to win and who's going to lose these districts and states. Just because of the fact that it got to a point where people looked at Justice Cavanaugh and looked at his family, and they looked at him instead of a guy who was a monstrous sexual predator, and they looked at him as a mom looked at him as a son, or as a brother, or as a dad, or as an uncle, or as a co-worker. And I do think that, especially in, I don't know what everybody else thinks here, when he talked in his testimony about the fact that his daughter said, when they said their prayers at night, and you can just envision this, and you could just see, if you looked at even more than 30 seconds of the Cavanaugh hearings, that Cavanaugh wasn't just kind of doing this for the sake of doing this for a hearing, that this is what they do in the Cavanaugh house, and that they were kneeling down saying their prayers at night, and his little 10-year-old girl said, let's pray for the woman tonight, when his family had been through what they had been through. And you could see that, and little 10-year-old kids don't just do that on their own. That's the way that 10-year-old kid was raised. So I do think that your point is great, Anna, that I think there's a large portion of suburban women, and not just women, who said that, you know what, enough is enough of the Cavanaugh stuff. I don't know if it's going to be enough in light of everything.
Yeah, I would say two things. One, I agree that I don't know that it's going to be enough, but there is something about Virginia 10 that I've been watching for a long time, and that, not because you live here, but because Comstock has been down by pretty significant margins, and yet nobody's running away from her. The Congressional Leadership Fund is still supporting her. The NRCC is still supporting her. Other Republican-oriented super PACs are still supporting her. Whereas you take a guy like Kevin Yoder in Kansas 3, his polling is much closer than Barbara Comstock's polling, and yet the Republicans have abandoned him. So there's something going on in Virginia 10 that is leading the people who are making these resource allocation decisions to continue to invest in that race, whereas they're deciding that Colorado 6 and Kansas 3 and Minnesota 1 and those are no longer worth it. So, yes.
What sort of an impact do you think the Libertarians are going to make in this election, especially in races such as Indiana and New Mexico? Since in Indiana, the Libertarian woman who's running is polling currently at 8% as of Monday, which is well within the margin between the Democrat and the Republican. Democrats about 41%, and the Republicans about 40%. And same with New Mexico, because Gary Johnson was the former presidential candidate for the Libertarian Party, and he's doing quite well in New Mexico, and has actually received an endorsement from Senator Rand Paul over the Republican. And also the Republican Party has kind of backed out of New Mexico totally in this sense.
Yeah, what's your first name?
Noah.
Noah. It's a great question, Noah. I don't think it's going to have much of an impact in Indiana. I don't think New Mexico is a race that's on anyone's radar, because I think so I don't think it's going to have a consequential impact there. Indiana, I think Joe Donnelly's the incumbent. He's a Democrat. It's one of the races that I talked about originally. This guy named Mike Braun, who has never run for political office before. He's a self-funder. Whether you like it or not, that matters. He's put a ton of money into this race. He beat 2 congressmen in a very heated primary, really by virtue of the fact that he muscled them out money-wise, found himself in a general election. He does have that guy drawing, the Libertarian drawing a little bit. I don't think it's going to be enough to alter the outcome. I think Donnelly's in trouble because of the fact that he voted against Cavanaugh, and also he voted against him after saying he was going to vote for him. That's another. He said, he came on and said, I'm going to vote for Cavanaugh. Then the Blasey Ford thing happened, said, I'm going to rethink it. Nobody likes people who equivocate. Let me just finish, if I could. Montana.
Yeah.
Check out Montana if you want to. That's one state you didn't mention that I think a Libertarian is actually going to have an effect.
Mr.
What's that?
Breckenridge.
Breckenridge. So Breckenridge, I think is going to cause trouble for the Republican challenger. The Democrat incumbent, this guy Tester, is in the race of his life. You'll see Donald Trump actually go to Montana at least once between now and a week from today, because I think he thinks he might be able to steal it. I think what might save Tester is Breckenridge, the Libertarian candidate.
Do you think that Then.
No, go ahead.
Do you think that it's sort of like a message that the political tides are kind of turning and that both Republicans and
A message of what? I'm sorry. You said you think it was sort of a message, and then I lost what you said after.
It's okay. Do you think that it's sort of a message, these, like the resurgence in, say, the Libertarian Party, current numbers that they're getting historically high numbers as far as like modern times go for third-party candidacies. Do you think this is sort of an indication of perhaps a shift and maybe lack of faith in Republicans and Democrats to get the job done nowadays?
I don't. I think that, third-party candidacies can have an impact, and we are seeing, I think, more of them than we have in the past. But I don't think we are going to see enough of them that it would materially impact races. The Indiana races, our class has heard me say this, I'm no more capable of objective thought on Joe Donnelly than I am of my own children. He was perhaps my closest friend when I was in Congress, but I think he's in trouble. I think he's in trouble, and I think he's in trouble whether there's a third-party person in the race or not. I think it will be very, very close. But one thing with Donnelly, the only race he ever won in Indiana with more than 50% of the vote was when he won the Senate race. His House races, he always had the benefit of a third party that was taking votes away from the Republican candidate. So he was winning with 48.5 or 49.1 or whatever. But I think he's in trouble, as much as I hate to say it.
Yeah, and I think, let's not forget in Montana, Trump won Montana by 20 points. So Trump sees that there's an opening there. And I think Tester is only up by 4 points right now. So that closes, and it's trending for the Republican.
Yeah.
But I think Breckenridge could be the difference there. As far as whether or not you're going to see a legitimate third party or a legitimate, I shouldn't say legitimate.
Yeah.
Libertarian Party is legitimate. But a party or a candidate that belongs to a party that's going to alter the outcome of a race to the extent that they're actually going to win, I don't think it's going to happen anytime soon. Ross Perot was probably the last one that actually got a pretty significant chunk of a vote. You will see, and we have some races that Taylor, I know you guys have a race where you'll see a candidate actually go out and get signatures for somebody from the Green Party or the Libertarian Party to get them on, because it's like, okay, this guy's going to take votes away from my challenger, and everyone's in on the gang. But I don't think Breckenridge is part of that. As far as the pox on both their houses, that kind of party, there's a pox on both their houses constituency that's always out there. And that's another thing that you should look for. People who don't like the Democrats or the Republicans voted for Donald Trump in 2016. People who don't like Democrats or Republicans right now are trending towards Democrats.
I'll say a couple of other things. National trends matter. Messaging matters. National mood matters. But so also do candidates. And I think in 2 Senate races, the Manchin race in West Virginia and the Tester race in Montana, I don't think there's another Democrat on the planet that could win a statewide race in West Virginia except Joe Manchin. And I think he's going to win it. And I feel the same way about Tester. I think that he has a brand in Montana that works for him. And yes, it's close, but there isn't, if there was any other name with a D next to it in Montana, that person would lose.
But if you look at Montana, Tester and this guy Matt Rosendale, who's the Republican, they look exactly alike.
Yeah.
They're two big, heavy-set white guys with flat tops.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They pull.
Yeah. So, Taylor.
Going back to the fundraising, how Beto O'Rourke raised so much money. Heidi Heitkamp had the same exact thing happen with the no vote, except she raised so much money it's larger than the entire population of the state of North Dakota. So I don't know if her she raised grassroots funds, but clearly those aren't her constituents. So do you think her race is different where the money doesn't equal a vote per se, just because she's losing so badly?
I don't think the money is going to matter. I don't think anything's going to matter for Heidi Heitkamp because she voted against Cavanaugh. In North Dakota, support Cavanaugh versus oppose Cavanaugh. Support Cavanaugh 60%, oppose Cavanaugh 27%. She took the wrong vote.
But she got think it was like $13 million.
I know, she got a lot of
She
money.
has so much money.
Yeah, and as Tim knows, when she's done and she loses, she can contribute all that money to charity.
What a cynic. I agree with Peter. I think that also it's an apples to oranges comparison. She's presiding over a state with 500,000 people. Beto O'Rourke is Texas is the second most populous state in the country. So there's a fundamental difference there. But I also think, like I said, you don't need to outspend your opponent in order to win, and I think she could easily outspend her opponent, but I don't know that it's really going to help her, because I just think that it's just such a tough race for her to win.
Nora?
Do you think in races like with Heitkamp and Donnelly that actual Cavanaugh vote really affected them, or were they already, like, especially with Heitkamp, don't you think she's kind of already going to...
Heitkamp was going down, yeah. She was in trouble. Donnelly, I think, was on the fence. Donnelly was in a state where Donald Trump won by 19 points, so he had to kind of mind his P's and Q's. And the thing is, Donnelly was voting, if you look at Donnelly's voting record, Donnelly voted with Donald Trump a large percentage of the time. I think the thing that's going to hurt Donnelly more than the fact that he ultimately voted against Cavanaugh was the fact that he equivocated and said that he was going to vote for Cavanaugh, put out a press release, and then said he was going to vote against Cavanaugh.
There's also...
So one final thing on that is because people hate politicians so much, and if they think they're up to something, then they really hate them. The one thing that's going to help Donald Trump in 2020, and I'm sure that messaging people are looking into this, because if I've seen this poll, they've seen it. One of the qualities that people like most in an elected official, people don't like anything really in elected officials, are people who keep their promises. And then they say, and then another poll that I saw was, if you could say one positive thing about Donald Trump, what would it be? Top thing in the poll is he keeps his promises. So the fact that Donnelly came out and said, I am going to vote for Judge Cavanaugh, and then he comes out a week later and says I'm voting against him, that kind of bugs people.
I think the Donnelly race and the Manchin race will tell us something, in that historically races have been run trying to capture the middle. That the far left and the far right, those were taken as givens, but that the races were won and lost on the margins by attracting as many people as you could by virtue of having moderate positions and so on, or positions that allowed one to cross the aisle. Increasingly, races are now becoming base races. And if Manchin wins, that means that at least in West Virginia, that was not a base race. If Donnelly wins, that means that at least in Indiana, that was not a base race. Joe Donnelly is a moderate. Dems have stuck with him because they know that for the most part, he will be a vote for the Dem agenda, even though he has a very strong record of crossing the aisle. Same with Manchin. Whereas if someone, let's say if Chuck Schumer Gillibrand tried to run as a moderate in New York, that probably wouldn't work. Tim Kaine running as a moderate in Virginia does work, but we have fewer and fewer states in which running towards the middle works, whereas running towards the extremes and trying to capture the base does work.
We have 1 minute left. One thing that I've said to our class, because obviously it's a self-selected group that obviously is interested in campaigns and politics and candidates, and hopefully someday they'll get involved, whether they're political journalists or strategists or campaign managers or even candidates. And one of the things, and I'll say that to the group at large right now too, I would encourage everyone to do it and get involved in the process. It's probably like the adult version of sports, because there's a winner and a loser and it's a lot of fun. But what I will say is there's, and I'm sure all of you at this point, maybe you put it in your college essays, there's the man in the arena, people who actually get in and do it and put themselves out there. I'm in awe of people who actually do it. I've advised candidates at the highest levels. I've done debate preparation for presidential candidates who walk out on the stage. I've written speeches, and it's all behind the scenes, and it's all well and good. And it's all easy to be an expert in a green room, but it takes a certain kind of guts to put your name on a ballot. I would encourage everyone to do at least one or the other. I would encourage everyone to really be even more gutsy and be a candidate. Tim Bishop did that. He has an experience like nobody else, and he won. Usually when you run, you lose at least 5 or 6 times. I'm in awe of the fact that I get to teach a class with a guy who has that extra bit of guts to put his name on a ballot and to go out there and put his name out there and to do it and to win and to take all the criticism. And so I would encourage everyone to get involved at some level, but if in fact you find the guts someday and you pray to God and He gives it to you someday, you should do what Tim Bishop did, because there's no better way to participate in the process, no matter whether you're a Democrat, Republican, progressive, liberal, libertarian. Someone like Tim Bishop deserves, also because he's a Holy Cross grad, a lot of credit, and I want everyone to applaud people like Tim Bishop.
Thank you. Thank you. All right, thank you all very much. I hope you found this to be at least somewhat illuminating. Thank you all very, very much.